Number 207 Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, stands as a quiet neighborhood home, its weathered exterior hiding a history of unimaginable horror. Between 2002 and 2004, Ariel Castro abducted Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus from the streets of Cleveland, holding them captive in his basement for over a decade. They endured abuse, isolation, and brutality within those walls. The house, once a place of family, became a prison for these young women. No one outside knew their fate until 2013, when Amanda Berry escaped through an unlocked door. She took her 6-year-old daughter with her and called for help. Police arrived quickly, rescued the other 2 women, and arrested Castro within hours. His home, once a place of captivity, became the site of their rescue. Castro later pleaded guilty to 937 criminal counts of rape, kidnapping, and aggravated murder as part of a plea bargain. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years without the possibility of parole. Just a month into his sentence, Castro died by suicide in his prison cell. The house on Seymour Avenue remains a solemn reminder of both terror and survival. In 2002, Michelle Knight, a 21-year-old woman walking to court in Cleveland, Ohio, was abducted by Ariel Castro. She would remain captive in his home at 200 and 207 Seymour Avenue for over a decade. During her captivity, she endured horrific abuse and repeated rapes at the hands of Castro. He once bought her a puppy for companionship, but killed it when she tried to escape, deepening her despair. Michelle discovered she was pregnant during her captivity. Castro violently caused her to miscarry by hitting her with a dumbbell. Despite the brutality, Michelle clung to her faith and hope, believing that one day she would be found and reunited with her son. For years, she remained trapped in that house, surviving through sheer will and the bond she formed with the other women who would soon be taken from the streets of Cleveland. What kept her going was the knowledge that someone would one day find her. But for how long would she have to wait? In April 2003, Ariel Castro abducted Amanda Berry, adding her to the growing list of captives held in his home on Seymour Avenue. She was 17 years old when she disappeared from the streets of Cleveland, Ohio, never to return to the life she had known. Like Michelle Knight before her, Amanda would become another victim of Castro's brutal and prolonged captivity. Within weeks of her arrival, she was locked inside the same house that had already become a prison for Michelle. Amanda Berry and Michelle Knight soon formed a bond, treating each other as sisters despite the horrific conditions they endured. Their relationship would prove essential for survival, offering a rare sense of companionship in a place where fear and violence ruled. Amanda Berry later became pregnant during her captivity, and Michelle Knight delivered the child, performing life-saving CPR under the threat of Castro's violence. The child, named Jocelyn, would grow up in captivity, believing Michelle and Gina DeJesus to be her aunts and thinking their captivity was normal. April 2004. Gina DeJesus was just 14 years old when she was taken from the streets of Cleveland, Ohio, by Ariel Castro. This abduction marked the 3rd time Castro had targeted young women in the city. Michelle Knight had been abducted in 2002 and Amanda Berry in April 2003. All 3 women were held captive in Castro's home at 2000 and Amanda Berry in April 2003. All 3 women were held captive in Castro's home at 200 and 719 Their years in captivity were a harrowing ordeal of abuse, control, and isolation. Though separated at times, the three women found solace in each other's presence, forming a bond that helped them endure the unimaginable. Gina, like Michelle and Amanda, lived with constant uncertainty about the outside world. Yet, in the darkness, she found strength in knowing that others understood her plight. The years passed slowly, marked by violence and confinement. But Gina's story, along with Michelle's and Amanda's, would not end in silence. In 2013, Amanda Berry managed to escape, bringing their captor to justice. What happened during those years of captivity remains one of... For over a decade, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus lived in unimaginable terror within the confines of Ariel Castro's home on Seymour Avenue. They endured years of physical and psychological abuse at the hands of their captor. While in captivity, Amanda Berry gave birth to her daughter, Jocelyn. Jocelyn was raised unaware of the true nature of her circumstances. The girls lived in constant fear, subject to Castro's controlling behavior and brutality. In 2013, Amanda Berry seized an opportunity to escape when Castro forgot to lock the front door. She ran for help, alerting neighbors who called the police. Officers swiftly arrived, rescuing Michelle Knight, Gina DeJesus, and Jocelyn. Castro was arrested shortly thereafter. Though free, the psychological scars of their ordeal would remain with the women for years to come. The front door of the house at 207 Seymour Avenue was left unlocked. It was a mistake Ariel Castro would not live to correct. On a night in 2013, Amanda Berry slipped out, carrying her 6-year-old daughter, Jocelyn, who had been born in captivity. She ran through the quiet streets of Cleveland, her mind clear for the first time in more than a decade. Neighbors saw her, heard her cries, and called the police. Within hours, officers arrived at the house. Inside, they found Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus still held against their will. The rescue was swift. Castro was arrested at his home just hours later. For years, the women had endured captivity, abuse, and isolation. But on this night, a single unlocked door changed everything. Amanda Berry's decision to flee was not only an act of survival, it was the beginning of the end to a nightmare that had stretched across nearly 2 decades. The investigation into their disappearances had stalled for years, but what kept it from progressing remained unanswered. Now, the women were free, and Castro would soon face the full weight of the law. On a spring day in 2013, officers arrived at 2207 Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. Following Amanda Berry's escape and frantic call for help, they entered the home where Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus had been held captive for more than a decade. The two women were found in the basement, an area where they had spent much of their time in isolation. Shortly after their rescue, Ariel Castro was taken into custody at the same location. Castro was charged with 4 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of rape following the operation. In a plea agreement, Castro admitted to 937 counts of rape, kidnapping, and aggravated murder. His sentence was life imprisonment plus 10 years, with no possibility of parole. 1 month into his sentence, Castro took his own life in his prison cell, hanging himself with bedsheets. His death marked the end of a legal process that had been decades in the making. The rescue brought an end to a nightmare that had lasted nearly 2 decades. For Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus, it was the first step in a long journey toward healing. For Castro, it was the beginning of a prison term that would last a lifetime, though not long enough to atone for what he had done. The arrest of Ariel Castro came just weeks after Amanda Berry's escape, marking the end of a decades-long nightmare for 3 women. In 2013, following Berry's call to police, officers arrived at 2207 Seymour Avenue and freed Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus, who had been held captive for more than 10 years. Castro was taken into custody shortly after. At his plea hearing, Castro entered a guilty plea to 937 criminal counts, including rape, kidnapping, and aggravated murder. The plea agreement allowed him to avoid the possibility of a death sentence, but the legal consequences for his crimes were severe. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 7 years. The sentence reflected the gravity of his actions over a decade of captivity, torture, and violence against 3 women. Castro's sentence was meant to ensure he would never again pose a threat to others. But just 1 month into his incarceration, on September 3, 2013, he took his own life in his prison cell. His death left many questions unanswered, but the legal system had already delivered its judgment. The plea, the sentence, and the final act of suicide all underscored the profound impact of Castro's crimes and the resilience of the survivors who endured them. In September 2013, Ariel Castro entered a courtroom in Cleveland and pleaded guilty to 937 criminal counts, including multiple charges of rape, kidnapping, and aggravated murder. The plea was part of a deal that avoided a trial, allowing the legal system to move forward with a conviction on charges that spanned more than a decade of captivity and abuse. Castro was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 1,000 years, with no possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the gravity of his crimes, which included the prolonged imprisonment and systematic abuse of 3 women. Just 1 month after beginning his sentence, Castro took his own life in his prison cell. His death marked the end of a legal process that brought closure to the survivors, though the emotional scars remained. The plea and sentencing were significant steps in ensuring that the victims' voices were heard, even in the absence of a trial. Castro's actions had left a lasting impact on Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus, who had endured years of isolation and suffering. The legal proceedings underscored the severity of his crimes and the profound injustice the survivors had faced. September 3, 2013. Ariel Castro's life behind bars ended abruptly when he was found dead by suicide in his prison cell. Just 1 month into his sentence of life imprisonment plus 100's wealth. His death brought a finality to the legal proceedings that had finally brought some measure of justice for Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. Though Castro never faced trial for all the crimes he committed, his guilty plea ensured he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. For the 3 women who endured over a decade of captivity, abuse, and violence at Castro's hands, his death marked a complex moment. Relief that the man who had held them captive was no longer a threat was intertwined with the painful reminder of their trauma. The legal system had moved forward, but for Amanda, Gina, and Michelle, the journey toward healing had only just begun. After their rescue, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. Each carried the scars of a decade in captivity, but each also found strength in the support of those around them. Michelle Knight learned that her son, Joey, had been adopted shortly after she disappeared. Though the news was painful, she came to accept it, knowing he was safe and well cared for. In the years that followed, the three women, though forever bonded by their shared experience, chose separate paths. They leaned on each other during the early days of recovery, but eventually moved forward with their own lives. Their resilience became a source of inspiration to many, as they spoke publicly about their journey, advocating for survivors of abuse and trauma. Ariel Castro, meanwhile, was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 1,000 years, with no possibility of parole. His death in September 2013 did not bring closure to the survivors, but it marked the end of a long and brutal chapter. For Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, the road ahead was uncertain, but they walked it with determination, one step at a time. The captivity lasted over a decade, leaving deep scars on Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. The physical abuse, psychological manipulation, and isolation they endured reshaped their lives in ways that would take years to untangle. For many survivors, the trauma lingers long after the immediate danger has passed. Amanda Berry's escape in 2013 was more than a rescue. It was the first step toward healing. For Michelle Knight, faith became a source of strength, even as she struggled to accept the loss of her son, who had been adopted after she disappeared. The pain of that loss was compounded by the emotional toll of her years in captivity. Despite the weight of their shared experience, the three women chose to move forward. They found support in therapy, in community, and in each other. Their journey was not easy, but it was theirs to shape. With time, they began to reclaim their lives, not just from the past, but for the future. What remains unclear is how fully the trauma can ever be healed. Some scars once formed never fully fade. By 2013, the house at 2107 Seymour Avenue had stood silent for nearly 2 decades. Outside, life moved on. Inside, 3 women remained trapped. While the initial investigation into their disappearances yielded some leads, it ultimately did not lead to arrests or charges. Public interest waned, and the case drifted into obscurity. The only evidence was the house itself, its walls holding the silence of a decade-long nightmare. It wasn't until Amanda Berry's daring escape that the true horror of what transpired within those walls came to light. No one expected her to break free. No one anticipated the rescue that followed. The case had been largely forgotten until the door was left unlocked and a child's voice called for help. Amanda Berry and her daughter ran toward the nearest neighbors, their cries breaking the quiet of the neighborhood. Within minutes, police were on the scene. The rescue of Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus had begun. In the days that followed, the community of Cleveland rallied around the survivors. Local residents organized fundraisers, and public appearances by the women brought national attention to their story. For Michelle Knight, the aftermath brought a difficult but ultimately comforting revelation. Her son had been adopted, and though the loss was painful, she found solace in knowing he was safe. The support from the community became a vital part of their recovery, offering not just resources, but a reminder that they were not alone. The Cleveland kidnappings left a profound mark on the criminal justice system and the way society responds to long-term abductions. In the years that followed, changes were made to improve survivor support and law enforcement protocols. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus, though forever changed, found strength in each other. Their shared experience forged a bond that continues to influence advocacy efforts for survivors of trauma and abuse. Their escape brought national attention to the hidden realities of captivity and the resilience of the human spirit. Even now, their voices remain a powerful reminder of the need for compassion, reform, and lasting support for those who have endured unimaginable hardship. In the years following their rescue, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus have continued to speak out about their experiences. Their stories have been widely shared in media and news outlets, drawing attention to the long-term effects of captivity and the need for support for survivors. Today, all three women remain active in advocacy work, using their voices to help others who have endured abuse and kidnapping. They have appeared in interviews, documentaries, and public events, sharing their journeys of survival and resilience. Their efforts have helped raise awareness about the importance of trauma support, victim advocacy, and the strength it takes to rebuild a life after unimaginable suffering. If you're ready for another story of resilience and justice, subscribe for the next investigation.